bringing the people behind our food to life.
I'm going to introduce Dan Imhoff, who has been writing a series of books, most recently the book called CAFO, Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation, and Dan's going to tell you a little bit about what's happening nationally with this issue.
I'm the first to admit that this is a highly charged, personal, and political topic. And despite cultural squeamishness or intentional denial about the conditions involved in the production of animal-based foods, I think it's high time that these discussions see the light of day. This issue of industrial-based versus pasture-based animal food production is in fact on the forefront of the healthy food movement that is sweeping the country. And I'm grateful that we have this topic here tonight. I'd also like to add a few talking points up front. I'm not here to convince anyone to become a vegan or vegetarian, though you're perfectly welcome to draw any conclusion that you might come to. And I'm also not here to describe a world or a food system without livestock or farm animals. I'm a small livestock producer myself. I've been laying hens and broiler chickens and even an occasional pair of hogs for many years. But ever since my older brother gave me his tattered copy of Francis Moore Lepay's Diet for a Small Planet in 1978, I was a sophomore in college. My own personal dietary ethics have been evolving, and my distinct form of omnivory can best be described as conscious but complex. Francis Moore Lepay's central thesis that using tens of millions of acres of lands and other resources to grow feed for animals rather than food for humans is a recipe for tragedy struck a deep chord in me. And in the 40-plus years since its publication, Americans have increased their annual consumption of meat by 25% to over 220 pounds per person, not including dairy or eggs. In the United States alone, 10 billion animals were raised and slaughtered at the turn of the 21st century as animal protein became the centerpiece of the all-American meal. More alarming, global consumption of animal-based food products is predicted to double by 2050. Finally, I would also like to say that I want our small farmers and ranchers who integrate healthy animals into their farming systems to thrive, and in the next 10 to 20 years, to become the authentic face of American agriculture. And I admit that it is very strange to spend 2.5 years of your life working on a book that is named after an acronym, especially an acronym that rolls off your tongue and reeks to high heaven, or shall we say hog hell, like CAFO. For those of us whom this is a strange word, and there are tens, if not millions of Americans alone, let it be strange no more. Outside of Oregon, we're talking nationally now, CAFO is an official designation of the Environmental Protection Agency. It stands for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation. And just as it sounds, a CAFO describes a facility where large numbers of animals, 1,000 animal units to be precise, and that's based on cows and goes much higher depending on the other animal that would be its equivalent, are confined and fattened on imported feed for at least 45 days. These CAFOs typically occupy an area much smaller than a traditional pasture-based system where animals are regularly rotated from field to field and where much of their feed is grown right there on the farm and their waste returns to the farm as fertility. Savvy minds in the audience may reasonably ask, why is the Environmental Protection Agency concerned about animal food production? And the answer is simple. A CAFO confines as many animals into the smallest space to grow them as quickly as possible at the least possible cost. It sounds like a factory, right? Like the EPA might be concerned about. And one of the most significant challenges with concentrating 100,000 beef cattle or 10,000 hogs in 8 windowless buildings or 30,000 broiler chickens in a single poultry house or 15,000 Holstein cows in a modern mega dairy involves the tremendous output of waste. It is far too often far too much waste for the surrounding landscape to safely absorb as a fertilizer, and there becomes a pollution hazard. Manure and wastewater have the potential to foul the air, land, and water, as we know, and this is not your run-of-the-mill animal poop. CAFO waste is largely untreated and can contain as many as 160 different gases and potential pollutants, such as dangerously high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, bacteria and antibiotics, hormones containing endocrine disruptors, and heavy metals. According to the US EPA, hog, chicken, and cattle waste has polluted 35,000 miles of rivers in 22 states and significantly contaminated groundwater in 17 states. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, livestock production contributes 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this report has been criticized as being both gravely underestimated and over-exaggerated. But here's the point. Our increasing appetite for meat has a definite impact on our air, water, and climate. One has to wonder, does this scenario sound like a farming operation with cows grazing in pastures, pigs rolling in mud, and roosters crowing from fence posts? Or does it sound like an industry with a toxic waste problem? Just ask the citizens of the town of Thief River Falls, Minnesota, who were evacuated in the summer of 2008 because of hydrogen sulfide emissions hundreds of times above the legal limit from a nearby dairy CAFO. Or ask Vincent Petit, a 28-year-old researcher in a state-run French virology lab. He'd just finished riding Sir Glitter, his retired thoroughbred racehorse, on the Saint-Michel-en-Graves beach in Brittany. The two suddenly became mired in green muck as Petit led the horse on foot in search of a place to cross a stream running through the sand. The horse collapsed and died within seconds. The rider lost consciousness, and a dirty secret on the Brittany coast reverberated across food-worshipping France. Decaying green algae, linked to hog farms and industrial agriculture upstream, was fouling some of its prized beaches with poisonous gas. So you see, CAFOs aren't a uniquely American problem, but they are part of a larger dilemma we face as our industrial economies collide with the limits of the natural world. They are one of a series of mega-scale industrial production models, like clear-cut forestry, like deep-water fish trawling, like mountaintop removal coal mining, like single-use disposable packaging that developed primarily in the latter half of the 20th century and are now spreading throughout the world's economies. Conventional wisdom tells us that for better or for worse, we're stuck with these models like CAFOs. There are too many of us to feed, to be fed, and compromises must be made in order to accomplish that. We want cheap food. We want animal protein, and we want it more than ever. Despite its seeming cruelty, producing food by cramming hens in cages, straitjacketing sows their entire adult lives in gestation crates is the only efficient way to create healthy food at the scale the world demands. The economic justifications go on and on. We Americans spend less than 10% of our household income on food, dramatically less than most citizens in other countries. We've been freed from the grueling tasks of farm work, at least those of us who've found other ways to make a living. And despite occasional headlines of massive food recalls, the system is safe by and large. It is difficult at times to not be persuaded by this point of view. Certainly, there are CAFO operators that take their jobs and responsibilities very seriously, that consider themselves upstanding employers and valuable community members, and that care genuinely for their animals. But while CAFOs may be defensible in isolated cases, in isolated communities, the whole picture is not so savory. We are essentially being told that CAFOs are too big to fail, an argument we've heard recently. 2.5 years of careful study of this issue has shown me that the only way that we can see this system as cheap or efficient or sustainable or healthy is through bogus accounting. The accountants of the CAFO industry have literally cooked the books by omitting the totality of the costs of their food production that it's based upon. The CAFO operators and defenders, writes Wendell Berry, make an economic virtue of heartlessness toward domestic animals to which we humans instead owe a large debt of respect and gratitude. The real costs of these production systems, often cleverly hidden from public view, are mounting, and they will be paid by all of us. Let's talk about a few.